Daddy, she's shaking. Treasure pointed across Romano's diner. At the counter stood an elderly woman, soaked and trembling. Water pooled around her ruined shoes. Please, her voice cracked. Just something hot. I can pay tomorrow, I promise. The waitress folded her arms. Sorry, ma'am. No payment, no service. Policy. Matthew's chest tightened. He thought of the $43 in his wallet. 3 weeks of sacrifice. His daughter's only birthday wish. But before he could process what was happening, Treasure had slipped out of their booth. Wait! Please wait! Her 7-year-old daughter was already halfway across the diner, her white church dress, the one she called her birthday dress, catching the light as she hurried toward the stranger. Matthew's heart lurched. Treasure! She didn't hear him. Or if she did, she didn't stop. The elderly woman turned, surprise evident in her refined features as Treasure came to a breathless halt in front of her. You don't have food, and you're cold. You can share mine. 7 words, spoken by a little girl. And in that moment, everything shifted. But nobody knew it yet, not the single father counting his last few dollars, not the lost woman with a waterlogged wallet, and certainly not the little girl who just wanted someone to have a warm meal on her birthday. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. The woman stared down at his daughter, and Matthew saw something flicker across her face. Shock, then something deeper. Her blue-tinged lips parted, but no words came out. Matthew was already on his feet, crossing the distance between them. Treasure, you can't just— But Daddy, look at her, Treasure interrupted, her brown eyes wide and earnest. She needs help. He did look, really looked. The woman's clothes, though drenched, were clearly expensive, the kind of tailored elegance that spoke of wealth. Her wedding ring, a stunning diamond set, caught the diner's fluorescent light. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that she was shivering violently. Her face was too pale, and she looked like she might collapse at any moment. Matthew made a decision. Ma'am, he said quietly, would you please join us? We'd be honored if you'd have dinner with us. The woman's eyes, sharp and intelligent despite her obvious exhaustion, moved from Treasure to Matthew, assessing. I couldn't possibly impose on your daughter's birthday. You're not imposing, Matthew said firmly. Please. There was a long moment where she seemed to be weighing something. Then slowly, she nodded. They settled into Matthew's booth, Treasure sliding in next to her father so the woman could have the whole opposite bench. The same waitress who'd turned her away approached with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Can I get you folks anything else? Matthew felt the weight of the bills in his pocket. $43. 3 weeks of sacrifices. He'd been so careful with the math. $16 for Treasure's chicken Alfredo with breadsticks, $3 for her lemonade, $2 for his coffee, leaving $22 to get them through the next 5 days until payday. His daughter was watching him with those trusting eyes, believing he could make everything work, always believing. Yes, Matthew heard himself say, another chicken Alfredo plate please and hot tea, right away. The waitress nodded and hurried off. Matthew didn't let himself calculate the new numbers. Not yet. Young man, really, this is too generous, the woman began. It's not generous, it's just dinner. Everybody needs help sometimes. The hot tea arrived within minutes, and the woman wrapped her trembling hands around the cup with such visible relief that Matthew knew he'd made the right choice, regardless of the cost. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea. Are you okay, Treasure asked, leaning forward with concern that seemed far too mature for 7 years old. What happened to you? The woman took a careful sip of tea before answering. My car broke down a few miles from here. I was trying to find help when the storm caught me. She gestured ruefully at her soaked state. Everything in my bag got waterlogged. My phone won't turn on, and the magnetic strip on my card is damaged. I'm afraid I'm rather stranded. Where were you going? Matthew asked. Something softened in the woman's expression. Here, actually, to Ashford. Today would have been my 47th wedding anniversary. My husband and I were married at the old courthouse here, and I wanted to visit. To remember him. Would have been? Treasure asked softly. He passed away last year. The simple statement carried such weight that even Treasure fell quiet for a moment. The food arrived, and Matthew watched his daughter's face light up at the sight of the meal she'd been dreaming about for months. But instead of immediately digging in, Treasure carefully pushed the breadstick basket toward their guest. You should eat first. You need it more. The woman's hand reaching for a breadstick trembled slightly,
Not from cold this time. What's your name, sweetheart? Treasure. Treasure Hillary. And this is my daddy, Matthew. Treasure, the woman repeated, as if testing the weight of it.
They ate together, and slowly the story emerged in pieces. Elizabeth spoke about her late husband, about how they'd met when they were barely 20, about building a life together. She was careful with details, Matthew noticed, but something in the way she carried herself, the quality of her soaked clothing, the unconscious authority in her voice, it all suggested she wasn't just anyone. "Did you have children?" Treasure asked between bites of her Alfredo. "A son. He's grown now with his own family. He worries about me." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "Probably would be horrified if he knew I'd driven myself all this way alone." "Why did you?" Matthew asked. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, staring into her tea. "Because some journeys need to be made alone, even when they're hard. My husband always said that grief is just love with nowhere to go. I suppose I needed to bring my love back here, to where it all started." The raw honesty of it settled over their small table like a blanket. "That's beautiful," Matthew said quietly. "It's lonely," Elizabeth corrected, but not unkindly. Then her gaze moved between father and daughter. Matthew felt the observation like a gentle probe. He glanced at Treasure, who was focused on her meal, and made a decision to trust this stranger with a piece of their truth. Treasure's mother left when she was 2, said the struggle was too much. "So yes, I suppose I do understand." Elizabeth nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something she'd already guessed. They talked more as the meal continued. Treasure, emboldened by Elizabeth's kindness, chattered about school, about her teacher, Miss Roberts, about the field trip where she'd first smelled the chicken Alfredo that had become her birthday wish. "I've been asking for it since October," Treasure explained. "Daddy saved up for 3 whole weeks." Matthew winced internally, but Elizabeth simply reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. The gesture was maternal, understanding, and it made his throat tight. "Your father must love you very much," Elizabeth said to Treasure. "He does," Treasure agreed matter-of-factly. Then quieter, "He works really hard, 2 jobs, because of my heart." Matthew's hand stilled on his coffee cup. He hadn't wanted to bring that up, hadn't wanted pity or awkward questions. But Elizabeth's response surprised him. She didn't gasp or offer empty platitudes. She simply asked, very gently, "What's wrong with your heart, sweetheart?" "It doesn't beat exactly right," Treasure explained, with the practiced ease of a child who'd explained her condition many times. "The doctors say I need surgery to fix it. That's why I can't run too much, and why I get tired sometimes. But Daddy's saving up, so maybe next year." "Maybe sooner," Matthew said, though they both knew it was more hope than reality. $15,000. He had $4,300 saved. At his current pace, maybe 2 more years. He caught Elizabeth studying him, those intelligent eyes seeing far too much. When their gazes met, she didn't look away, and he had the strangest sensation of being truly seen, not just his current struggle, but the weight of it, the years of it, the quiet determination that kept him moving forward. "You're doing more than your best," Elizabeth said firmly. "You're raising someone who thinks of others before herself, even on her birthday. That doesn't happen by accident." The meal wound down, and reality crept back in. Matthew caught the waitress's eye and asked for the check, his stomach nodding as he did the mental math he'd been avoiding. $38. The 2 chicken Alfredo plates, the lemonade, the tea, the extra breadstick basket Treasure had requested. He had $43. $5. That's what would be left. $5 until Friday. Matthew laid the bills on the table without hesitation, including a $2 tip because the service had been prompt, even if the waitress had initially turned Elizabeth away. Sometimes you had to choose dignity over practicality. Elizabeth had been watching. She said nothing, but something shifted in her expression, a kind of resolve settling into place. "Where are you staying tonight?" Matthew asked as they prepared to leave. Outside the windows, full darkness had fallen, and the temperature had dropped further. "I haven't quite worked that out yet," Elizabeth admitted. "I was hoping to get my phone functioning, or perhaps find a hotel that would take a check." Matthew and Treasure exchanged a look. "You should stay with us," Treasure said immediately. "Oh, sweetheart, I couldn't." "She's right," Matthew said. "It's not much, just a basement apartment, but we have a couch. You're welcome to it for the night. And in the morning, we can help you sort out your car situation and contact your family." Elizabeth looked between them, and for the first time since they'd met her, tears actually spilled over. She wiped them away quickly, almost embarrassed. "You don't even know me." "We know enough," Matthew said simply. The walk back to their apartment was cold and quiet. Elizabeth walked between them, Treasure holding her hand without being asked. Matthew noticed how carefully Elizabeth moved, how the evening had clearly taken its toll on her physically, despite the hot meal. Their basement apartment looked even smaller with a guest. Matthew saw it through Elizabeth's eyes. The kitchenette with its single hot plate, the bathroom door that didn't quite close, the sleeping bag rolled in the corner that was his bed, the single twin mattress where Treasure slept.
But if Elizabeth was shocked, she didn't show it. She simply accepted the threadbare blanket he offered, the pillow that Treasure insisted she take, the good one, and the cup of chamomile tea he made on their temperamental hot plate. "I'll call for help first thing in the morning," she promised. "I've imposed enough." "You haven't imposed at all," Matthew said. "Get some rest." He settled Treasure into bed, going through their nightly routine, teeth brushed, prayers said, one story read by the dim lamp they shared. "Daddy," he whispered as he tucked her in, "do you think Miss Elizabeth will be okay?" "I think so, sweetheart. I'm glad we helped her." "Me too, baby, me too." He kissed her forehead and returned to the main room, where Elizabeth was already lying down, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Her eyes were closed, but something about her breathing told him she wasn't asleep. Matthew retrieved his own thin sleeping bag and settled onto the floor near the kitchenette, far enough to give her privacy, but close enough to hear if she needed anything. "Matthew?" Elizabeth's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you. Truly, you and your daughter, you've restored something in me tonight, something I thought was gone." He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply replied, "You're welcome."
Silence settled over the small space. Through the high window near the ceiling, Matthew could see a sliver of night sky. He thought about the $38 he'd spent, the $5 that remained, and somehow couldn't bring himself to regret it. Treasure had been kind. He'd supported that kindness. Whatever happened next, they'd done the right thing. He just hoped the right things would be enough to keep them afloat for 5 more days. Morning came with weak December sunlight filtering through the high window. Matthew woke to find Elizabeth already up, sitting on the couch looking significantly more composed despite wearing yesterday's dried clothes. She'd somehow managed to tame her gray hair into a neat bun, and the sharp intelligence in her eyes was fully present now. Her phone sat on the coffee table, partially functional. "The rice in your cupboard helped dry it out enough to make calls," she explained. "I hope you don't mind that I borrowed it." "Of course not. I've called for a tow truck for my car, and my driver is on his way from the city. He should be here within the hour." Matthew nodded, feeling an unexpected twinge of something like disappointment. In the space of one evening, this stranger had become something like a temporary family member. Treasure emerged from their bedroom, her hair a wild halo around her face, and lit up when she saw Elizabeth. "You're still here." "For a little while longer, dear one." They shared a simple breakfast, toast and jam, tea for Elizabeth, milk for Treasure. And then the sound of a car horn came from outside. "That's my ride," Elizabeth said, standing slowly. She looked around the small apartment one more time, then knelt down to Treasure's level. "You, my darling girl, are going to do extraordinary things in this life. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She hugged Treasure tightly, then stood to face Matthew. "I'd like to stay in touch, if that's all right. May I have your number?" Matthew recited it, watching as Elizabeth programmed it into her partially functional phone. Then she wrote her own number on a scrap of paper and pressed it into his hand. "Call me if you need anything, anything at all." "We'll be fine," Matthew assured her, though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. Elizabeth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, I believe you will be." And then she was gone, climbing into the back of a town car that looked utterly out of place on their run-down street. Through the window, Matthew saw her speak intently to the driver, saw her pull out a laptop from a bag the driver handed her, watched her transform from the vulnerable woman they'd helped into someone else entirely,
someone accustomed to authority and control. Treasure pressed against his side. "I'll miss her." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Life returned to its familiar rhythm. Matthew went to his job at Patterson's Auto Repair, spending 8 hours under cars and trucks, his hands black with grease, his back aching from the concrete floor. It was the day after Christmas, and the shop was quiet. Most people were home with family, which meant fewer cars to fix, which meant less money. He kept thinking about Elizabeth's words. "You're doing more than your best." Was he? Some days it felt like his best wasn't nearly enough. $4,300 saved toward a $15,000 surgery, living in a basement where Treasure deserved a real bedroom, working himself to exhaustion while his daughter spent her days with Mrs. Chen next door. But Treasure was fed, she was safe, she was loved. Maybe that was enough. He finished work at 6 and walked the 1.5 miles home, saving the bus fare. Christmas break meant Treasure had spent the day with Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, who watched her for whatever Matthew could afford to pay, usually $20 a week, and help with her heavier chores. When he arrived home, Treasure was already there, the door between their apartment and Mrs. Chen's adjoining unit still ajar. "Daddy!" She bounded over, and he caught her carefully, mindful of her heart, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "How was your day, princess?" "Good. Mrs. Chen taught me to make dumplings. Well, I tried. Mine looked funny, but they tasted okay." They settled into their evening routine. Treasure did her reading practice while Matthew heated up a can of soup and made grilled cheese sandwiches with the bread and cheese he'd budgeted carefully. It wasn't much, but it was warm and filling.
They ate at their small table, Treasure chattering about a book she was reading, about Mrs. Chen's stories of growing up in Taiwan, about everything and nothing. Matthew let her voice wash over him, grateful for this moment of normalcy, of peace. And then came the knock. 3 firm raps on their door. Matthew glanced at the clock, 7:02 p.m. They never had visitors. "I'll get it," he said, rising from his chair. When he opened the door, the last person he expected to see was standing there. Elizabeth Williams. But not the Elizabeth they'd met 2 nights ago. This Elizabeth wore a navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of his rent. Her gray hair perfectly styled, diamond earrings catching the dim hallway light. Behind her stood a man in a driver's uniform, and another person in a business suit holding a leather briefcase. "Hello, Matthew," she said with a warm smile. "May I come in?" For a moment, he couldn't speak, could only stare at the transformation, at the woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom. "Miss Elizabeth!" Treasure had spotted her from the table and rushed over, throwing her arms around Elizabeth's waist with complete, innocent joy. Elizabeth hugged her back, something soft and genuine breaking through her polished exterior. "Hello, darling girl. I've missed you." Matthew finally found his voice. "Please, come in. I'm sorry. It's not much." "It's perfect," Elizabeth said firmly, stepping inside. The driver and the other person remained in the hallway, but Matthew could feel their presence, could sense that whatever was happening was significant. They settled in the cramped space, Elizabeth on the couch, Treasure beside her, Matthew on the single kitchen chair he'd pulled over. The air felt charged with something he couldn't name. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," Elizabeth began, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Not dishonestly, but by omission. My full name is Elizabeth Williams, and I own Med Supply Innovations. Perhaps you've heard of it?" Matthew had. Everyone in the medical field had. It was one of the largest medical equipment and supply companies in the region, known for both quality products and philanthropic work. "You own—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "My late husband and I built it together, starting in a garage 45 years ago. When he passed, I inherited full ownership." She smiled faintly. "The night we met, I was exactly who I appeared to be, a widow, stranded and exhausted, at the end of a grief-filled journey. But I was also someone with resources, someone who could have called any number of people to rescue me immediately if my phone had worked." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. "But it didn't work, and instead, I met you, both of you. And I witnessed something I haven't seen in a very long time.
True, sacrificial kindness. Matthew, I noticed the money you counted at the restaurant. I saw what that meal cost you. And, Treasure, sweet girl, you gave away your birthday dinner, the thing you dreamed about for months, to a complete stranger. Treasure ducked her head shyly, but Elizabeth gently lifted her chin. Don't hide from it, darling. It's the most beautiful thing I've seen in years. She turned back to Matthew. I've spent the last day and a half making calls, doing research, thinking. My husband always said that our success was measured not by the money we made, but by the lives we touched. For the past year, I've been lost in grief, running my company but forgetting that purpose. You reminded me of it. Matthew's heart was pounding now, some instinct telling him that his life was about to change, but not knowing how, not daring to hope. I have a proposal, Elizabeth said. We're opening a new distribution center here in Ashford in 8 weeks. I need an operations manager, someone trustworthy, hardworking, intelligent, someone who can manage inventory, coordinate with suppliers, lead a team. The position pays $72,000 annually with full benefits, including health insurance that starts immediately.
The room seemed to tilt. $72,000. It was more than triple what he made now, working 2 jobs. Mrs. Williams, I don't have experience managing. You managed to raise a remarkable child alone while working multiple jobs and saving for her surgery. You managed to show kindness when you could barely afford to feed yourself. You managed to see a stranger in need and help without hesitation. Elizabeth's voice was firm. Those are the management skills that matter. The rest I can teach you. Matthew felt Treasure's hand slip into his, felt her squeeze tight. There's more, Elizabeth continued. Med Supply Innovations partners with Children's Medical Center. I've already spoken with their cardiac department head. Treasure Surgery, whatever she needs, is fully covered through our partnership program. No cost to you. It can be scheduled as soon as next month. The words didn't make sense at first. They were too big, too impossible. Treasure's Surgery. Covered. Next month? I can't accept this, Matthew heard himself say, even as everything in him screamed to say yes. It's too much. We barely know each other. You know the most important things about each other. I know you're a good man, a devoted father, and someone with integrity. You know I'm someone who keeps her promises and values kindness above all else. That's more than many business relationships start with. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folder, extending it to him. This is the official job offer. Take tonight, read it over, think about it. But Matthew, please understand, this isn't charity. I need someone I can trust in that position, and I trust you. Your daughter gave me back something I'd lost. Let me give you something in return, not out of pity, but out of recognition. You've earned this.
Matthew took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were official documents, a contract, details about salary and benefits and responsibilities. It was real. All of it was real. Why? He whispered. Why us? Elizabeth smiled, and for the first time, he saw tears in her eyes. Because my husband always said that character is what you do when no one important is watching. You had no idea who I was, what I could offer. You helped because it was right. That's the kind of person I want in my company. That's the kind of person I want in my life. She stood, and Matthew stood with her, the folder clutched in his hands like a lifeline. Think about it tonight, she said. Call me tomorrow with your answer, but I hope you'll say yes. I think we can do a lot of good together. She bent down and kissed Treasure's forehead. And you, my darling, are going to get that heart of yours fixed, and then you're going to run and play and do all the things 7-year-olds should do. I promise. Treasure threw her arms around Elizabeth one more time, and Matthew saw the way the older woman held his daughter, tightly, tenderly, like she was precious. And then, as quickly as she'd arrived, Elizabeth was gone, leaving behind only the folder and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. Matthew stood frozen in the middle of their tiny apartment, staring at the closed door.
Daddy? Treasure's voice was small and wondering. Is it real? He looked down at the folder in his hands, at the official letterhead, at the salary figure that seemed impossible. Then he looked at his daughter, at her bright eyes and hopeful face, and the heart that didn't beat quite right but was so full of love it seemed to overflow. Yeah, baby, I think it's real. And for the first time in 5 years, since the day Angela had walked out and left him alone with a toddler and a mountain of fear, Matthew Hillary let himself cry, not from despair, but from hope. 3 months later, Matthew stood in the doorway of their new home, a small 2-bedroom house with a yard and a kitchen where everything worked, and watched through the window as Treasure ran. Just ran, for the pure joy of it, her surgery scar hidden beneath her t-shirt, her laughter carrying on the spring air. Elizabeth sat beside him, a cup of tea in her hands, looking more at peace than he'd ever seen her. "She's healing beautifully," Elizabeth observed. "Dr. Morrison said her heart function is already at 90%. "I don't know how to thank you," Matthew said, for what felt like the 1,000th time. "You already have," Elizabeth replied. "Every day, by being exactly who you are, by raising that extraordinary child, by managing the distribution centers so well that the corporate called to compliment me on my hiring choice."
She smiled at him. "We all needed each other, Matthew. You and Treasure gave me a reason to remember why my husband and I built our company. To help people, to make a difference. I gave you an opportunity you'd earned through years of quiet integrity. It's not charity, it's recognition." They watched Treasure together, and Matthew thought about that December night, about the moment his daughter had seen a stranger in need and refused to look away. One choice, one act of kindness, one moment of seeing someone else's struggle as more important than your own comfort. That's all it took to change everything. "Her real half-birthday is next week," Matthew said with a small smile. "The one where she claims she's 8 3/4. I was thinking Romano's Diner, chicken Alfredo, if you'd like to join us." Elizabeth's eyes brightened. "I'd be honored." And so, 7 days later, they found themselves in the same booth where it had all begun.
"Chicken Alfredo with breadsticks," Treasure announced to the waitress. Then she paused, looking thoughtful. "Actually, is there anyone here who looks like they need a meal? Because I'd still share if someone needed it." The waitress, the same one who turned Elizabeth away that night, looked at them with tears in her eyes. She'd heard the story. The whole town had heard about the millionaire and the single dad and the little girl who gave away her birthday wish. "On the house tonight," the waitress said quietly. "All of it, please." "That's not necessary," Matthew started. "Please," the waitress said. "I was the one who turned Elizabeth away that night. I'd like to make it right." Elizabeth waved this away graciously. "You were following policy, no hard feelings at all." But she left a $200 tip anyway. They ate together, laughing and talking, and Matthew watched his daughter, his healthy, thriving daughter, and felt gratitude so overwhelming it hurt to breathe. "Daddy," Treasure said suddenly. "Yeah, sweetheart? That night when I wanted to share my Alfredo with Miss Elizabeth, you almost said no, didn't you?" Matthew glanced at Elizabeth, then back at his daughter. "Yeah, I almost did." "Why didn't you?" "Because you were right," he said simply. "Birthdays are for sharing good things, and you taught me that some things matter more than playing it safe."
Treasure smiled, that radiant smile that made everything worthwhile. "See? Good things happen when you're kind. You just have to wait for them sometimes." Elizabeth raised her glass of lemonade. "To kindness. To family. The one we're born with and the one we choose. And to second chances." They clinked glasses, lemonade, water, and coffee, in the same diner where their lives had intersected and changed forever. Because here's what Matthew understood now. Kindness doesn't always come back to you. You can't give it expecting rewards. You give it because it's right, because it's human, because your daughter is watching and you want her to learn that people matter more than security. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, kindness does circle back. Sometimes it knocks on your door with an impossible offer. Sometimes it pays for miracles. Sometimes it gives you back the future you'd stopped letting yourself imagine. Not because you earned it, not because you deserved it more than anyone else struggling in the world, but because one night you chose compassion over self-preservation and someone noticed. "More breadsticks?" the waitress asked, appearing with a fresh basket. "Yes, please," Treasure said. Then she looked up with serious eyes. "And if anyone ever comes in who's cold or hungry and can't pay, you tell them there's a table here that's always willing to share, okay?" The waitress pressed her lips together, nodding as tears spilled over. "Okay, sweetheart, I promise."
Elizabeth squeezed Matthew's hand across the table. Treasure hummed contentedly as she ate. And Matthew knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice that night. Because this wasn't a story about money. It was about a 7-year-old girl who saw suffering and chose kindness. About a father who supported that choice even when it cost him everything. About a widow who remembered what truly mattered. It was about the moment someone stops walking past and starts seeing. When safety becomes less important than compassion. When you realize that what you have in your bank account means nothing compared to what you carry in your heart. The world doesn't always reward kindness. Most of the time, it doesn't. But sometimes, when you least expect it and need it most, it does. And those moments change everything.
If this story touched something in you, if you've ever had to choose between kindness and security, if you believe good people still exist, share this story. Leave a comment about a time someone's kindness changed your life, or when you chose to help even when it was hard. Subscribe to Soul Lift Stories because we're just getting started. Every story we share is a reminder that humanity is still worth believing in. Those small moments matter. That one act of seeing another person's pain and choosing to help, that's how we change the world. Not through grand gestures, though those matter too, but through shared meals, open doors, the decision to notice instead of walking past. Treasure noticed. Matthew supported her. Elizabeth responded. 3 lives transformed by one moment of choosing right over easy. Your moment is coming too. The question is, when it arrives, will you be ready to choose kindness? Thanks for being here. And remember, birthdays really are for sharing good things. Until next time, keep lifting souls.